this is really this is a test of Putin. Putin is being tested, and so I think there is a test here. If we hear the same old stuff out of Putin, and then they go to the press conference, and the most they can agree to is a prisoner exchange, then we'll know that certainly Putin is not serious at all, and Trump has to deal with that. So does Trump then say, "Well, you're not sincere. I'm going to crunch down on you in terms of sanctions and this type of thing"? Or does he go wobbly and say, well, I guess we'll have to try again, or, whatever he might do. But it is a test of Putin.
President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are preparing to meet tomorrow in Anchorage, Alaska, and the world is standing by to see what happens. Trump has warned of very severe consequences if Putin refuses to halt the war in Ukraine, and today has even offered encouragement that he thinks Putin will sign a deal. The Kremlin, meanwhile, has described the US approach as both energetic and sincere. They'll have a one-on-one meeting before delegations of 5 officials on each side continue the conversations. There will then be a press conference. But Alaska, once part of the Russian Empire, stands as a significant backdrop. Its history and geography underscore how deep-rooted tensions persist, even there. And today, it's home to 1,000 Ukrainian refugees, nervous at the thought of the destructive dictator of Russia touching down in what's really a matter of hours. Just a week ago at the White House, a historic peace accord was struck. Armenia and Azerbaijan signed a US brokered deal to end the decades-long conflict in that region. And at the centre of that agreement is the so-called Trump route for international peace and prosperity. It's a transit corridor. On today's programme, we'll hear from Azerbaijan's ambassador to the UK, who tells us that peace deal, mediated by Trump, definitely benefits Russia too. So today we ask, is President Trump emerging as an unexpected peacemaker? Or is this Alaska meeting nothing but a dangerous gamble? And uneasy peace may be traded for uneasy legitimacy. Welcome to Times Radio Drive. I'm Callum MacDonald. Also on the programme this afternoon, why a gender-critical book has been removed from an exhibition at the National Library of Scotland, and why universities seem to have boosted their intake of domestic students after today's A-level results, which I hope have gone extremely well. You can text us, of course, on 87222. Start your message with the word Times. You can email studio@times.radio, or the WhatsApp number is 0333 003 2353. And you're welcome to get in touch with your take on all that we are discussing. In the last couple of minutes, President Donald Trump has told Fox News Radio that he thinks Putin is going to make a deal, and says the threat of sanctions against Russia probably played a role in the meeting being organised in the first place. Earlier, Sir Keir Starmer hosted the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky at Number 10, where the Prime Minister warned his Russian counterpart must prove he is serious about ending the war. European leaders, including Starmer, had their online meetings with Trump yesterday, but how effective they've been in guiding this famously bullish US president towards a favourable position for Ukraine, of course, will not be clear until after the summit tomorrow. Let's begin our coverage this afternoon with Jim Townsend. He's the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy. Jim, good to speak to you. Good afternoon.
It's great to see you. Great to be on.
Trump says in the last few minutes that he is pretty confident Putin is going to make a deal. What do you think he's building that confidence from?
Well, it could have been from some of the remarks coming out of the Kremlin by the spokesperson there. But he's also likes hype. And he said good things a week ago. And then he began to walk those good things back, saying that, well, maybe we'll just kind of feel each other out. So he's kind of hitting all the various possibilities, and we'll just have to see what happens. But the great fear is that that sure, well, there'll be a deal that Putin wants to make. He's going to strike a deal. And the deal's a terrible one, and that Trump feels pressure and feels he needs to grab that, so he has something good to say at the press conference. So that's something I know that Europe and other world leaders are watching with some trepidation. That maybe he'll be too easy, Trump. He'll be too easy to agree to something coming from Putin.
Crucially, he seems to be really emphasising again in this interview with Fox News Radio. He says this meeting sets up the second meeting. So it's what you're saying there, Jim. It's kind of this, Trump described it earlier in the week, didn't he, as a feel-out meeting to sort of suss out where each other are. When it comes to that as a strategy, does that seem like a sensible approach to have a first meeting with a view to just getting in the room a second time?
There is. I mean, it's interesting because I would have thought that Trump and Putin have talked so much that they kind of know where each other are. But if he feels he needs to have a meeting to kind of feel both sides out, okay. But if they can agree to a ceasefire and they freeze the line of contact, and the ceasefire is all encompassing air, sea, and land. And they agreed for a 30-day period where diplomats get together and put together an outline of just what the progress could be, the program could be, the process. And then they come back for another meeting, either the two of them or maybe with Zelensky, once there's something on paper that all the sides can agree to. So I don't think he can have something really quick after this initial meeting. There's some work that's got to be done.
Are we seeing too much sort of pre-negotiating, if you like? One of these one of the arguments around these sorts of summits is that you can't sort of preempt too much. Trump saying again today that there will be give and take on boundaries and land in any second meeting, including President Zelensky of Ukraine. He didn't elaborate further on that. Obviously, the European leaders have set out their principles for what needs to happen and indeed not happen in this summit in Alaska tomorrow. What would you say about the detail that we have so far, Jim? Does it feel like it's too much?
Well, it's contradictory too, a lot of it. And I think there is too much in terms of something that we would consider a concession. They've already talked about, not having NATO forces in Ukraine as a security guarantee, and that's not a surprise. But when you agree, then you just made a concession. Having the meeting with Putin is seen by a lot of people as a concession because he had been isolated, and now he's coming to the U.S. He's going to meet with Putin. Suddenly, he's back in the mainstream, and so there have been a lot of things that people would have considered a concession, something you get something for, and there wasn't anything that came our way after from Russia after saying those things. But again, I don't want, and I think many experts don't want to see those two leaders doing negotiating the details at this first meeting. I don't want to see them doing negotiating details at all. I'd rather see something put together by diplomats that both sides can live with, and Zelensky is brought in and he can live with this, and they've got a three-way agreement at the staff level. Then you have the three leaders sit down, maybe they'll fine-tune it, but you don't have them do the pick and shovel work. That's done by others. So I hope that that's going to be one of the results of the meeting on Friday, is that we'll have some experts meet to put things down on paper.
Yeah, it sounds like there will be a meeting of 5 officials from each side, sort of delegations of the US and Russia, who will talk after Trump and Putin have spoken to one another. So perhaps they set out some sort of guardrails or whatever, and then the officials kind of carry it from there. Is it fair to say, Jim, that at its heart, this summit in Alaska is about trying to determine whether Putin shows even a hint of compromise, because he has been uncompromising up until now on a way to end this war? Is it looking for that hint? How could that hint present itself?
Well, and the NATO Secretary General said that too. He said that this is really this is a test of Putin. Putin is being tested, and so I think there is a test here. If we hear the same old stuff out of Putin, and then they go to the press conference and the most they can agree to is a prisoner exchange, then we'll know that certainly Putin is not serious at all. And Trump has to deal with that. So does Trump then say, well, you're not sincere, I'm going to crunch down on you in terms of sanctions and this type of thing? Or does he go wobbly and say, well, I guess we'll have to try again, or whatever he might do. But it is a test of Putin. And the thinking is, and I guess based on what Trump just said, the thinking seems to be that he has reached a point, Putin has reached a point where he's ready to be more sincere about beginning negotiations, but that doesn't mean that it'll happen fast. He might be sincere, and they might have a sincere meeting of experts, and they begin to put together the pieces of this, and it could take a long time. And so will they have a ceasefire that might go more than 30 days? Can they Can they actually avoid going back to open warfare while they're negotiating? How will that work? So this is a test, but if he passes this test of sincerity, that doesn't mean things will happen quickly.
Yeah, fair enough. Jim, thank you very much. Great to speak to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Jim Townsend is former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy. So then, we're getting a lot by way of, I would suggest, positive noises from President Trump, from Vladimir Putin, indeed from European leaders yesterday as well, who expressed some level of optimism for this summit tomorrow to be a good starting point, a launch-off point for further discussions towards ceasefire and peace. Let's speak to the former British ambassador to Ukraine, Lee Turner. Good afternoon to you. Is it fair to say that another foundational principle of whatever this process turns out to be is that Putin needs to have it reinforced to him what will happen if he was to go after Ukraine for a third time? So I'm assuming that there may be progress towards that, but surely there has to be some sort of security guarantee and deterrent at the heart of this to keep Putin at bay going forward.
I think we may be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit if we're talking about security guarantees. Certainly, if there is a peace deal and if there is a long-term ceasefire, we need to think very seriously about security guarantees, because we saw back in 2014, after the so-called Minsk agreement, which brought, in theory, the fighting to an end, that in fact the fighting carried on in a low-key way for 8 years, and Putin then invaded again. And we can be pretty confident that if there is a peace deal, without security guarantees, the Russians will just be waiting to take advantage of that and invade Ukraine again. So that will be very important. And I think this coalition of the willing that Sir Keir Starmer and the EU are trying to weld together is potentially very important, but we're a long way from getting a ceasefire at this moment, Callum.
Yes, that's a fair point, Lee. So then, to bring it back to where we're at and the tone, I suppose, in the build-up to this, a couple of comments just from today. Donald Trump says there is a 25% chance that the meeting on Friday will not be successful. Putin has been praising today Trump's sincere efforts, quote, to end the conflict. They're going to hold one-on-one talks. And the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says Putin must prove he is serious about peace. How would you cast your diplomatic eye and indeed ear over those comments, Lee? Where are we at in the build-up to this thing?
I think we're seeing a lot of sensible comments from the European side of the Atlantic, from Sir Keir Starmer and other European leaders who have been seeing President Zelensky of Ukraine to show their support for Ukraine's cause here. And of course, for any country in Europe, it's absolutely vital to see the core principle maintained that you cannot change borders by violence. Because if that principle is eroded, then really everything is up for grabs, and we will all be in a much more dangerous world, including the US. There was this great quote by Margus Tsakna, the Estonian foreign minister, this week, who said, if borders can be changed by force, none of us are safe. So on the one hand, the European Union and the UK is saying this principle is very, very important. They're saying between the lines, that means don't get into swapping of territories, don't get into recognizing some part of occupied Ukraine as being Russian territory. That's between the lines. But at the same time, they're trying to talk up the prospect of success because, like everyone else, they know that Trump is very thin-skinned and they don't want to say anything that might make him even more pro-Russian than he appears to be already. Unfortunately, my guess is that the prospect of there being a good result to this summit happening on Friday in Anchorage, Alaska, is pretty low. We seem to have President Trump very much hoping that some kind of vague business opportunities could come out of Russia if relations were normalized, if only these bloody Ukrainians would sort themselves out and accept that they've lost the war. That seems to be Trump's approach. And it's interesting that Russia has included in its delegation Finance Minister Siluanov and the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, a guy called Kirill Dmitriev. And indeed, Russia talked today about, and I quote, enormous untapped potential for trade and economic cooperation between the US and Russia. So they're very much focused on all this. And I'm very worried that they're not looking hard enough about the geopolitical significance of any deal.
Would you consider a second meeting to be enough of a victory to declare tomorrow's summit a success?
Well, the first victory is, of course, that President Putin has won a meeting with the President of the United States, giving him immense status and recognition. This is a man who's been indicted by the International Criminal Court for the mass kidnapping of children from Ukraine and their disappearance into Russia, who cannot travel to any country that has ratified or that's a member of the International Criminal Court. So really, that's a great victory already. Now, if there is some kind of tangible progress at this meeting in a way that makes some sense and that isn't anathema to Ukraine, then I think a meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin would be desirable. But let's see what comes out of this meeting tomorrow.
Yeah. I suppose then, Lee, we're all so trying to piece together what this is going to even look like. I can't get past what I'm imagining, this visual of Donald Trump presumably shaking Vladimir Putin's hand tomorrow, and if Donald Trump has his way, within the next couple of weeks, Putin and Zelensky then ending up in the same room together as well. I mean, we are potentially in for a really dramatic series of events here.
It is pretty dramatic stuff, Callan. The idea that Trump and Putin will have a one-to-one meeting, presumably with an interpreter, just the two of them in a room together. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? President Putin is a man who prepares minutely, who reads great briefings on how to get what you want out of your opponent, who's very experienced at all this. President Trump says, well, I can see what I can get out of a meeting within 2 minutes of walking into the room. Yeah. He likes to make decisions really off the cuff. He doesn't seem to pay any attention to briefings from the CIA or the State Department or anyone else. So it is a pretty dramatic situation. And I would love it, Callum, if I were to be proved wrong and if there were to be a really good result. Or I would be delighted if I were to be proved wrong. And President Trump is serious when he threatens very severe consequences if Putin doesn't agree to end the war after Friday's meeting. Because we've seen this before, that President Trump said that if Putin hadn't agreed to a ceasefire by the 8th of August, there would be very severe consequences and massive sanctions on Russia. And nothing happened. And we've seen this time after time. Yeah. And very much hope that this meeting will be different.
Lee, it's so good to speak to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Callum.
Thank you. That's former British ambassador to Ukraine, Lee Turner, whose book, Lessons in Diplomacy, is available now.